If you remove the first two rungs of a corporate ladder and you leave the people at the top to keep moving up, what happens when they exit? Who is on that ladder?
How do you build a workforce for a world that doesn't exist yet? Himanshu Palsule is CEO of Cornerstone OnDemand. He's led the company through 4 acquisitions, a complete product transformation, and navigating technology shifts from enterprise software to AI. Today, Himanshu joins us to talk about the shift from "Are you doing things right?" to "Are you doing the right things?" Why inference, context, and trust are the new competitive advantages, and what he's learned building agentic AI while running one of the world's largest talent platforms. Welcome, Himanshu.
Thank you. I made it to the Meg and Amy show.
You did it. You have arrived.
I have
You
arrived.
absolutely have arrived. We have lots of exciting things to talk about today, but before we dive into the meat of it all, I saw that on International Women's Day, you posted about your granddaughter, and we wanted to congratulate you on this big milestone of becoming a granddad.
Thank you.
And wanted to ask you a little bit about what that's like and what you're thinking about as having this new person in your life.
And having a new promotion, you have a whole new job description.
Yes.
Certainly an upgrade. Yes, Amy and Meg, thank you for that. I just this last weekend, I was in New York, and now that she turned 3 months old, there was more interaction than when I was there when she was first born. So, while it's delightful, it is a little strange that you're holding your daughter's daughter, and you wonder, when did all that happen? Blink of an eye and all that. But then the other thought that comes to mind is this is what we're calling generation beta. And they're coming to the world at a time where I believe AI always will have a greater corpus of knowledge than they will, because generative AI started, a few years before her. So holding her in my arms, I couldn't help wonder what life's going to be like, what corporate life's going to be like when she grows up, what is going to be the situation at work, how are decisions being made, how does humanity interact? And so even at a professional level, that's given me enough impetus to make sure we do the right thing by us, by technology, by gender, because I've got a young one that's going to come into the workforce 20, 25 years from now.
Those are some heady philosophical thoughts that you have going on there.
I think we all wonder as well, just to, anybody that's experienced brand new child in your life or in your world, you recognize they just have this wealth of potential in front of them, and you feel the weight of the reality that you could be the one to screw it up for them. But left to their own devices, they're truly amazing learning creatures. And to your point, I think the reality of what does the world look like when humans are not the top of the food chain intellectually, whether we have a country of geniuses or however we want to think about it, how do we keep those opportunities available to those brilliant next generation children that are coming after us? And how do we get the best out of the innovation that is coming forward with technology? It's like the moment is now. So very, very wise thinking, that's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, the way I look at it is we are custodians of a generation, and then we pass that along, and we hope we've done the right thing by that generation. And as I speak with even, my children and young adults, they can be critical, as they should be, on several things that didn't quite go per plan, such as the health of our planet, such as, being a completely equitable society, which we're not. But then I always remind them, but we did a whole lot of good things, whether it was with modern medicine and healthcare, whether it was with innovation and lifestyle, conveniences in living. So take that and improve on that. But, the thing I worry about this generation is sort of don't be disenchanted by everything and give up. And don't be the generation of zombies that sits back and complains on what was given to you or done to you. we certainly, came in with a whole lot that had to be figured out. Heck, the internet wasn't there. Black and white television had started. So we sort of done our part, right and wrong. And I hope that next generation, especially now that we are on this transformative crossroads, where for the first time humans may not be the only or the most intelligent beings on the planet, I certainly hope that things work out well for them.
Another recent occurrence in your life was you attended the World Economic Forum a couple months back now, and you were on a panel with some big thinkers and business leaders, and that panel was called Corporate Ladders and the Great AI Reshuffling. Tell us a little bit more about that experience in particular, Himanshu.
Well, this was my second Davos. It is great. I mean, you don't go there to relax and enjoy. You go there to network and learn. This opportunity in particular, I embraced and welcomed. Firstly, the topic, and secondly, the colleagues that I was sharing the stage with. And look, the great irony of our times, I believe, as it stands today, and I hope it changes, is the workforce that's most capable of fundamentally thinking and reimagining artificial intelligence is being left out of this race. I mean, we are still relying on middle management and then baby boomers like me to learn elements of what this new world is, vibe coding and all of that, and pretend we understand and know it all. And the generation that grew up with literally a Google or a Chat GPT or that amount of knowledge in their back pocket is being moved to the sideline. So then what happens 10, 15, 20 years from now when finally we decide, because we definitely are overstaying the party now with healthcare and all of that, but when we decide to move on, now you have a group that not only was disenchanted, but unskilled in this new world. So the whole topic was around, if you remove the first two rungs of a corporate ladder and you leave the people at the top to keep moving up, what happens when they exit? Who is on that ladder? So it's a very serious problem that I love that there were people there that were solving. They were fundamentally looking at educational systems. They were looking at models. They were looking at jobs to be done. But it is scary that the rate at which entry-level jobs is going away right now and going to accelerate far outpaces the availability of our talent. So we got a big glut coming our way.
Right. And I think you've referred to it as the leadership pipeline vacuum. In watching that panel that you were on, the Minister of Education from UAE, Sarah, I believe is her first name. What do you think about what she laid out? And is that something that the largest customers in the world that you speak to every day, is that something that they're looking for from Cornerstone, from you? Like, how do you see the evolution of a curriculum that's actually going to skill our young people and make this, fill this gap?
Yeah, she was brilliant. Sarah was brilliant. Her foresight, her imagination, her curiosity. And I had visited Dubai and Riyadh just before that, and we are working with education organizations there. But, they are fortunate to have a forward thinker like her. Look, the challenge with our education system was what I call the lowest common denominator problem. And there's been enough research now that indicates you learn differently, you assess differently, you quiz differently, your strengths are different in how you learn. That doesn't mean you're good or bad. So this new world of hyper-personalized learning, something we certainly are focused on at Cornerstone, is going to be a savior, where whether I had a learning disability or my learning style was different, now you're able to cater to that. The more that goes into our education system, in fact, I met a gentleman who runs this global program where he says, I'm not going to teach anything that is going to be available in your back pocket on your phone. And his example was, should I be teaching the Pythagorean theorem, or should I teach them to build a bike? And while they're assembling the wheel, I can explain the concept of pi to them. So this real world usage of what we learn is, the learn to learn is going to be very effective. That movement has started, as with everything, unfortunately, with everything from funding to skilling, our education system seems to lag our ambition. I've been on 2 colleges advisory boards, and I left both of them because I realized that tenured professors weren't going to change. And, I was hitting my head on a wall that was giving me a headache. But I'm hopeful that whether we are forced into it or we think about it, it's going to change.
I like that you're drawing the connection between what's happening in corporate from a role perspective of the more senior people blocking new ideas and fresh talent from entering, and the academia, which is having, the senior tenured people that are maybe struggling to rethink decisions they've taken in the past based on the way the world is today. I've had this theory about 2 kind of dimensions. One, the fact that most learning and new idea breakthroughs are best facilitated when you have people coming together from interdisciplinary backgrounds, having done different roles, different types, different things. And the fact that the benefit of early talent is not just about building bench strength, and it's not just about creating on-ramps into the workforce. The benefit of early talent is also about bringing a different lived context into the decision-making of the organizations themselves, although we don't tend to think of it that way. And so we relegate early talent often to roles that do feel like are better suited for AI agents that have a faster on-ramp time. And instead of really leaning on the idea that they could challenge us and our thinking so that we can imagine a new way of working or a new way of learning that might be better suited to the tools that we have available to us today. I'm curious if any of your customers or any of the discussions that you've had are really bringing this kind of multidimensional thinking to the structures of learning within corporations or the structures of organization design within corporations.
For sure. We recently ran a skills report, and it basically said, what are the new skills? What are the developing skills? What are some of the patterns that are changing? What struck me the most, what surprised me, I mean, some things are obvious. We all know which jobs are at greatest risk and which are not. And, there's a lot of predictable stuff. But the thing that struck me the most is the gap between technical skills and human skills is collapsing at a faster rate than ever before. It's almost 50-50 from like being 70-30, meaning your functional skill was far different and important than a human skill. And now with sort of AI taking away the foundation, some of the baseline, who you are and how you show up is probably more important than how much experience you have with something. Are you curious? Are you flexible? Are you courageous? How do you deal with pressure? How do you manage stress? All of those skills. Let's take an example of, a top grade programmer who you could sort of metaphorically lock in the basement, and they generated great code and didn't have to interact with anyone. And they were valued for it. And we've had people we worked with who were sort of your top architects, they were your top principals, but you wouldn't necessarily put them in front of a customer because that wasn't their core skill set, and they quite enjoyed that. I always say jobs aren't going away, tasks are going away. So if my job is product development and coding was a task, now if AI is doing that task, then what do I need to do to be a better product developer? I need to understand what my customers need. I need to decide what the outcomes are. I need to collaborate more. So cross-functionally, to your point, now we need to take into account that who you hire, human skills are going to be just as important in the interviewing process as the functional skill. You may be the greatest salesperson, the greatest marketer, the greatest service rep, the greatest coder, but there's a lot more that comes to bear. So organizations, and certainly we are doing that, you got to define your culture very carefully now. You got to be more agile in being able to adopt that culture to changing environments. And that you call it cross-disciplinary skills. I would say it's cross-disciplinary human skills have to be valued, because for every 100 agents, there will be one human orchestrating all of that, being in the center, being in the middle, making those decisions. I was in New York, as I said, on the weekend. As I was taking off from one of the airports there, we sort of stopped on the tarmac, and the pilot said, "We have completely lost communications with the control tower. And, we're just going to have to wait here to find out what's happening." That's a point where, with all the automation and all the fancy stuff, there's a human in the middle. And this was just when LaGuardia had this was absolutely the same time, had that accident with the airplane and the fire truck. So that's why those skills. So for that individual in the control tower, I could imagine making their decisions. It just wasn't about which AI agent should I, invoke right now. It's like, what should I do? Should I visually be looking outside? Is there a big red button I press? So those skills are becoming extremely important in corporations.
So Himanshu, I love that. I've had my own revelation with my own vibe coding experience, and that is really the need to become an executive and to develop executive function. So anyone who's using any of these tools need to do. So you take that developer or that architect who really was very narrowly focused on what they did well, which can now really be done by AI agents. They now suddenly need to develop executive function. They need to develop a high degree of judgment, of big picture thinking, of strategic thinking, of understanding customer context, all of these things that maybe they didn't really need to do before because someone else was telling them, and they spent all of their time on the coding. Those particular kind of human skills, which were reserved maybe for just certain particular jobs or particular levels, now everyone needs to learn, from my perspective. Is that ringing true for you as well in terms of how you're looking at the world?
Yeah, I'll answer that in two dimensions. The one is, that's always been the case, right? As I call it, the entropy of grunt work has always been decreasing. That has always happened. Now it's happening at a pace that nobody planned for. It's happening overnight. So people ask me, are we going to be in a world where everyone has to be a manager and no one is a worker, because you got to make management, or I call them orchestration decisions? I say, sure, maybe, but let's not confuse that right away. Let's not give that to an HR professional and have them build career ladders and titles and all of that. It's just that we have to be more context aware. And I'll come back to the word context a little later. So that context awareness is important in anything that you do. Like the example I gave is, all you did was you knew Python or Fortran better than anybody else, and that was your skill. You better now worry about how do you develop products, design them, and make them successful, versus just being a coder, because that coding is being done by someone else. If you don't do that, your job will get eliminated. Just like data entry operators went away, but the smart ones were able to figure out what do you do with the data, and data analytics was born. So new skills will be born. There definitely will be a percentage that will be left or lost because they never intended to do anything more than data entry. They didn't want to do anything more than coding. But a whole new generation, a cadre of talent and skills is going to be created. Then that's my point of, entropy of grunt work is always going to decrease.
One of the things that we've been exploring on the show is the shift from optimization to kind of reorchestration or reimagination of work. And the best I've seen it described is, moving from a Deming mindset of continuous improvement to a Clayton Christensen mindset of, disruption. And I think over the last couple decades, while we've had a few disruptive moments, most of what we've done in business has been about optimizing patterns that we believed in strongly. And I think as we move to this opportunity of disruption, we have to think in terms of unlearning at a much higher rate so that we can explore doing something very differently and ask ourselves more structural questions like, does this work need to happen at all? If we're looking for an outcome, have we built our path based on constraints we do not have anymore? So the way that I like to think about this is with an opportunities mindset. I like to think, hey, this is a chance for more of us to dig in and reimagine how to make that bigger picture work for more people. I'm curious, when you talk to your customers, where are some of the bright spots they're looking at for new opportunities and new ways that they can contribute, whether they're the L&D department or whether they're, sort of the business leaders? What are people doing today to create opportunity and to open up new pathways?
Great question, Meg. The statement I find myself using a lot these days is the old Stephen Covey statement that, are you doing the thing right, or are you doing the right thing? And traditionally, incrementalism in a workforce was rewarded. Is how do you improve efficiency by 5 or 10%? How do you increase the efficacy of a learning course? How do you measure skills better? Now is the time to ask the question, are you even doing the right thing? Do we need that? And I find myself, as we look at our organizational models, keep asking, do we even need that? Do we even need to do it that way? So I was recently on a tour in Europe. I was in Stockholm, I was in Gothenburg, I was in Paris and a few other places. And I met many, many of our large enterprise customers. What I was pleasantly struck by, because for whatever reason, and this was a blind spot, I thought, Europe is moving slower in the race towards AI than the Americas. I think they are putting in deep thought in what they're doing at these large enterprise organizations, common household names, is they are asking the question of themselves and their organizations is, will we keep doing the thing right, or is it time now to step back and do the right thing? And right thing means looking at your strategic workforce planning, re-looking at career ladders, and re-looking at how the whole reward situation is within a company. The second side of it, so that those are great conversations where people are telling us, their general manager comes to them and says, hey, it looks like every year I have like 30,000 engineers. I seem to fire 1,000 and hire 1,000. I never seem to know which is the right 1,000 to hire or fire, or do I even need to do that or not? That is forcing them to rethink the tools. Like, can I go to a 9-box, or is a 9-box in fact a misleading representation where I may be a high potential performer when it comes to coding skills, but I may be really weak on management? So that whole dynamic workforce orchestration, which is what Cornerstone's future is going to be at the moment of truth in the flow of work. How can you help someone make a decision? And for that, you have to completely rethink, it's not about tenure, it's not about title, it's not about the 9-box, it's not about the performance review a year ago or how this person fared. It's like, what is it that you're faced with today? And I'll give you a great example, which was an eye-opener on how this plays out. If you are a pharma company in Europe, and say you're working on oncological drugs, which is, you can't do that fast enough with everything happening in the world today. It typically took you 10 years to get a drug out. You needed 2 or 3 years of R&D. You had to figure out, you got millions of combinations on how do you fold proteins and amino acids to create a molecule? What are the right molecules that come together? Then you got to do clinical testing, which will take another 2 or 3 years. Then you got to put it in front of the commissions or FDA here. And it takes 10 years to get a drug out. Now, with deep learning, if companies in, say, China or India are able to synthesize a molecule in weeks or in months, and if regulation allows them to pass clinical trials in years, now what took 10 years is taking 1 or 2 years to bring a competitor drug out. What are you going to do about it? Are you going to fundamentally rethink what you do? So these real decisions are forcing people to look at their workforce and make very transformative decisions. And they're coming to us saying, help us with this because I know I need to get from point A to point B. And another customer of ours says, by 2035, the aircrafts are going to be pilotless. So the avionics are going to be completely different. We don't know what they are yet because they're still figuring all that out. But we've been asked to reskill the organization to prepare them for 2030. What should we do? So I'm glad people are thinking about that. I'm glad at Cornerstone we do what we do because we see that as an opportunity. But it's a seismic shift in what's going to happen within companies.
One of the things that I'm finding interesting out in the AI verse right now is kind of two ends of the spectrum in terms of how companies are approaching AI use within the company. And on the one hand, you're hearing all these stories of performative competition about, like if you're not using, X amount of tokens and this many agents, then you're falling behind. And there's like leaderboards and, all this kind of stuff. And then on the other end, there's limited tool access for the majority of the population, or there's even some concern about people using AI inappropriately, and and they're plagiarizing that. So there's like two ends of the spectrum, and I'm wondering like what your customers are, how they're approaching, and what you're seeing working versus not working in terms of how to enable the organization to move forward.
Here is my take on this, and here is how we are sticking to our knitting. Because at the end of the day, what do companies want? You have an intent, and then you have an outcome, and that's essentially 99% of probably what we all do in our lives is find a way to go from intent to outcome. Now, what happens in the middle has changed a lot. Whether it was automation, computers, websites, mobile phones, etc., and now it's AI. The thing that's different now between intent and outcome, and you can argue with ChatGPT today, you can collapse that right away. I can pretty much ask anything to it, and it has a ready-made answer. So surely I can go from intent to outcome much sooner. I had to go to a library when I was doing my engineering and open books and read something, which I could text and get that. So you would think the gap between intent and outcome has collapsed. The three things that we believe is most essential in that gap in the middle is inference, context, and trust. And companies that can do that, just like the companies during the dot-com days that survived, are going to make a difference. So let's start with that. The first is context. The more context you give the problem, the better the answer is, right? If I go and say, hey, teach me vibe coding, I'm sure it'll do a fair job at teaching me vibe coding. But then if it knew that, I was a CEO of a learning company and I was these many years old, and this is really what I was looking for, and this is how I learn, and these are the books I read, and this is what I learned will be much better. So we cannot forget the importance of context. And the second is inference. The T in GPT is about transformation. You can infer anything that you want based on what you're asking. The more targeted that inference is, the better it's going to be. And the final thing I believe that's going to be so fundamental in how decisions are going to be made is trust. Bias plays a big role in every decision being made, and you could make biases really bad by now making them scale faster. So companies who work really hard to earn a customer's trust, who have been by their side, who have solved complex problems for them, I think will survive. In this sort of chaotic world where I hear AI jealousy come in as, hey, they just launched another agent, and we just have two, and they have five, and they have this new MCP server, and it seems to be better than us. And I'll tell you, companies today, the Mag 7, 10, 15, whatever they are really obsessing over this. And maybe it's a good thing, maybe it's bad. I go back to my teams and I say, and our customers, and I say, look, you trust us to know your context and to give you the inferences to drive your outcomes. They may not be as flashy and immediate as you may think they need to be, but they will be purposeful and they will be deliberate. So that everyone has to find their altitude. As a company that invented LMS 25 years ago, we found our altitude is let's do the right thing and let's not get distracted by every shiny light that's being flashed in our face these days.
Yeah, I think the point of trust and how that relates to durability, both for software vendors, but also for solutions, really, really matters more than ever. And I do agree with you that when there's an explosion of choice, it actually can work against helping customers achieve real value. So I was at Unleash last week, and Ethan Pollock was a speaker. And I'm sure you've seen his work, and it is really fun. But I will say first one thing. He's the first speaker I've ever watched live that speaks at 2x pace. It is really quite something to watch. But he made one comment very early on that I think speaks to many of your customers and what they might be feeling right now. And he said that anyone that built AI content to help people in the organization understand and learn AI, if they built it before January, it's all obsolete and needs to be redone. Right. And so what that speaks to is two things. Obviously, the pace of change, and secondarily, that there was probably some pretty significant missignaling that we all kind of moved with because of the state of AI in 2025 that requires us in 2026 to take a pause and rethink some of our default assumptions. And the prompt engineering role was a big deal and no longer is necessary because the tools got better. That the value for coders was kind of a glimmer in 2025, and in 2026 we really had some pretty big breakthroughs that have made it more real and more usable. But also these sort of reinforcement learning opportunities within the models themselves has created sort of a pace of improvement that, to me, and I'm sure Amy can give you some examples from her vibe coding, feel a little bit like escape velocity. The pace has gotten to a place that even for me, it's feeling like, okay, how do you make any decision because everything is changing? And how are your customers seeing the role of learning and development in a world where there's so much to learn?
I mean, it's a deep question. So I'll tell you what I think, but the answer's got to be obviously deeper than that. The analogy I use is people who spend their life swimming in pools don't understand what's needed when you jump into a river because you don't know what to predict. So companies ask me, do you have a recipe on how I future-proof my business? And I say, how can you future-proof anything that's changing every 3 months? Is it future-proofing or is it economic survival? Are the two bookends that people need to worry about? So if you look at the sort of the meta layer of learning, and that's learning agility, it is what I believe we need to be teaching starting from, kids in school is how do you learn to learn, which is, I did 4 years of electrical engineering. The only thing I really took away from that is how do I problem solve? How do I work with teams? What do I do during stress? What do I do the night before the exam when the lights go off and you have a candle, true story, and you got to cram everything in 8 hours? That education to me was more valuable in today's world than, how does a circuit breaker work? So in corporations today, given the rate of change, it's like jumping into a river. Trying to find the exact right time to go in isn't going to matter because that time's maybe just as good or just as bad as something else. Now, the real question is, how do you create a continuous culture of learning agility? Easier said than done. And companies with blue-collar workers, we have some large customers with hundreds of thousands of people around the world that, whether you're delivering courier packages or you're making hamburgers, how do you keep them up with everything that's changing? So We recently did segmentation of customers, and there were customers with high learnability culture and low learnability culture. It started from the top. It often started with the executive team. It started with their ethos. It started in a lot of weight on the shoulders of CHROs. But we see customers today who are fundamentally turning learning inside out, just like schools should. Because if you're on an oil rig and if a valve breaks and you got oil spewing all over the oil rig, the classroom training from 2 years ago is largely ineffective on how to solve the problem. Somebody could ask you to put on AR, VR goggles, and they can walk you through how exactly do you fix it in real time. So that's where the learning is happening in the flow of work. But back to my earlier point is I would rather hire a person working on that oil rig who sort of has enough awareness, common sense, and calmness to solve the problem versus someone who's done it for 50 years and knows how every valve works. Because this valve this time is going to work very differently in the world of AI. So there's no easy answer to it, but my advice to our customers and to companies is start figuring out your learnability index. Think about the efficacy of your program. Think about, because at the end of the day, learning is only good as the recall, right? We don't learn just to sort of store stuff away. We have computers for that. We learn so we can recall it at the right time. So how do you teach someone to access the information for a quick recall is where learning needs to go. I think in 5 years, we'll have progressed enough as humanity where there'll be new rubrics that explain how exactly that's done. I'm sure, psychologists and cognitive scientists are working on this, but those are real problems. Behavior. My son finished his undergrad in cognitive science, and he's working on behavioral models. And it's fascinating to see how structured that thinking is in an unstructured world.
Another thing that I wanted to ask you about, you recently hired a chief AI officer. You're not just advising companies on learning AI and using AI and the new ways of work, but you're actually living it. You're building and you're creating within your company as well. And so I'm wondering what you have learned yourself
I've learned a lot.
that experience.
Yeah, I've learned a lot. Guna Jayaraman, our chief AI officer, I believe is one of a kind, not just for his AI skills, but just his broad thinking. As an example, when he joined, I did what every CEO does. I went to him and I said, hey, I really want to invest in AI. We have, thousands of developers around the world. They all work on many important things, but I'm going to make this a priority. You tell me how many ever people you want over the next year. We'll move people over from group A to group B. He looked at me and he said, I need 12 people. You give me 9 and I'll bring 3. I said, no, you don't understand. This is enterprise software. He said, no, you don't understand. I need 9 people, and each one of them will get an agent done in 3 months. So that is an example, but that set the course for a cultural change within a company. Now, look, we had very bright AI engineers within our company, and we still have them who were solving problems. But for someone who had seen scale, he came from Amazon, and he worked with very large corpus of data and challenges. What I learned every single day, and I'm not exaggerating, every single day over text, vibe coding, and other challenges he throws my way, is the real story on how AI is impacting all of us. The art of the possible, balanced with a sort of an outcome-based culture. Fundamentally, what I learned is we have created an intelligence that is getting more intelligent faster than we are. And problems of today may not have a solution, but problems of today will have a solution tomorrow that's far different than our ability to imagine it. And where that has, and I've sort of always been sort of a curious one, a CEO who came up the product ranks. So I've always loved examining the art of the possible, the cone of uncertainty, and all of that. But what I'm learning is the art of the possible is moving at a scale very, very, very different than the scales that we have imagined in our lifetime. And if it's that today, what will it be when my granddaughter gets into the workforce is a question for the ages.
Yeah, I love the small team request by your chief AI officer. I mean, we're hearing a lot about that. It just in
We
terms
have
of
more than 12 now, just to be clear. This was 6 months
yeah.
ago.
But I
Well, we don't
assume
have
that they're
500. Yeah.
broken into smaller teams within that, right? So the days of large teams and adding bodies to try to create outcomes are over. And not that you want to get rid of all the bodies, but you want many small teams working on big things, right? And anytime you have suddenly a large team, then it's creating a lot more coordination costs. It's causing a lot of communication issues and just load on everyone. So I'm assuming that's kind of where he's coming from in terms of, let's have a smaller number of people that that can work really closely together and then be able to deliver those
And the other
outcomes.
thing, Amy, is let's not get caught up in pigeonholing on titles that we all used to. Are you a designer? Are you an analyst? Are you a tester? Are you a coder? You're not. You're more than that. I mean,
Yeah,
when
right.
we created these templates for 12 industries, and if I remember the problem when I started doing this was, how do you get sample data? And then I was looking at a demo, and we had sample data for a medical company, and we had sample data for manufacturing, and the jobs there were foreman, supervisor, shift operator. I said, when do you get time to do all of that? And he gave me that look, and he said, Himanshu, I just told Claude, go create a manufacturing company with 100 employees, and it created that sample data for me. Again, light bulb moment on the world has changed.
I think one of the things that we really should be thinking about pointing our L&D organizations towards is building more context awareness within the broader organization. Because if each of our jobs becomes unlocked more with the better context of what are the customers we're serving, what is the value that we're creating, what is the envelope of profitability that we're looking to achieve, if that information is more widely understood, then the ability for more of us to contribute to those bigger goals, both with new creative solutions, but also with actual outcomes, I think we will be able to increase velocity a lot more. So instead of L&D trying to keep up with AI skilling, which is, a fool's errand at some level, right? Maybe pointing them to the durable thing that everybody is going to need, which is deep understanding of your company, your business, your customers, and the value and the commitment that you have to the market and to the customers that is uniquely yours, right? So to help build that trust.
Yeah. I mean, if you had 100 days as a timeline to do this, I would say spend a good 20 days in defining the problem exactly the way it is and examining the data sources, because AI will make bad data worse faster than the world before AI. So you'll fail faster, but it'll create a bias that's very dangerous. So take your time understanding. Are you even set up correctly? Do you have the data sources identified? Do you know where your corpus of information sits? So spend that 20 days in really, really defining the problem, then move to the end and imagine what that solution should be and what are you really solving for. Spend another 20 days in doing that. And then the stuff in the middle will happen faster than you imagine, but it'll happen really wrong if you didn't do step 1 and step 2, or it could happen really well if you spend time doing that. So instead of, people kind of heard large consulting companies come in and say, we can help you with sort of your strategic workforce planning, or we will help you create a new skills ontology or taxonomy that's better than someone else. Those are just tools. It's like, what do you want to do? Are you trying to reduce time to get a drug approved in a pharma context? Or are you trying to get a package from point A to point B with less risk? Understand that. And that's where these people are really good at, because they've done this all their lives. Don't sort of jump into vibe coding and figure you'll be, because to your point, that'll all change in 3 months. And then if you're not sure, call Cornerstone OnDemand.
There you go. Well played.
All right. So I do have one more question. We have been experiencing what some are calling the SaaS-pocalypse. Meg and I, as well as you, have been in the SaaS industry for many decades and have benefited from it, have loved it, appreciate it. We now understand that there are, potential threats, there are potential moats, and I wanted to get your perspective on what's real and what's hype and what's FUD in this conversation right now.
Yeah. So it's easy to dismiss it. It's easy to get enamored by it. I think the answer is somewhere in the middle. Here's what I say, that in a world of work, there are deterministic things and there are probabilistic things. The deterministic thing, if I'm paying someone payroll and they're getting $2,384.27, that's exactly how much I pay them. But if there's a world where I'm assessing talent and I'm giving a skill score on a scale of 1 to 10, yeah, 4.5 versus a 5, it won't matter as much. Ideally, if these two work together, and this is today, and who knows, 10 years from now, AI could become completely deterministic. I doubt it, but it could. But the pendulum swings, and when it swings, you got to move with it, knowing it's going to meet you back somewhere. You're not going to have to go all the way there. We are not going to be able to vibe code off ERP, CRM, learning, L&D solutions completely. But what will go is definitely going to go. And those are going to be the ones that, have a greater dependency on probability, that have a quicker time to value, that have more urgency in decisioning, that are good enough, that'll happen. So this is the time for you to go back, dust off, and look at your business model, everything from product to placement to pricing to promotions, all the basic stuff. Understand your customers, segment them the best you can, either by geography or by vertical or by size or however they do. And ask yourself the question, what must be true for this customer to be successful with something that has to be 0 or 1, as I call deterministic? That there's a lot. And SaaS models or software, for example, is going to be around for a very, very long time doing that. But what gets eaten away very, very fast is either the grunt stuff, the redundant stuff, or the stuff where a fuzzy answer is as good as, if I was going for a movie and I'm not going to ask Roger Ebert what he thinks about the movie. I'm going to ask Gemini, and it's going to give me a pretty good answer that's good enough for me. So I'll never need to call an individual for that. If I was looking at, what are the reasons for churn in my business, and I throw all my data points at churners and why would customers leave Cornerstone, I will rely on the cloud model. I'm not going to call one of the big consulting firms and pay millions to have them come and give me the answer. So those are very real changes. But if I'm running payroll, if I'm doing HR processes, I still need software for that. So the future is changing very quickly, but I don't think software is dying or going away anytime soon. But the way in which it gets delivered is going to be completely different, would be my take on it. But it's going to be exciting finding out how these things play out.
Definitely, I have a lot to
having
learn.
good learning agility is going to be key in it.
High learning agility. The 3 leadership traits that I ask when I hire for leaders is, what's your intellectual curiosity? What's your situational awareness? And what's your leadership courage to say no? So I think all that intellectual curiosity is extremely important now more than anything else.
Love it. That is a perfect ending. Thank you so much, Himanshu. I think I'm going to write those down and use them myself. So they'll help. Yeah.
Really enjoyed this conversation. I mean, good luck at your show. I hear a lot about it, but these are real world conversations that I'm glad you all are having with leaders in the world today.
Thanks so much, Himanshu. You ready to Leadership Corner, Meg?
I'm excited to Leadership Corner, Amy.
Okay, here we go. I keep saying I want to empower my team, but when they make decisions I disagree with, I step in and override them. I know this is undermining the very thing I say I want. How do I actually let go without letting things go off the rails?
I don't know. I wonder if Amy should go first because you're way better at this than I am. On the good side of this versus,
Yeah. All right.
I struggle with this.
Well, I do have some thoughts. Obviously, the ability to delegate and to trust your team with big things is the absolute most important thing that you can do as a leader, because that's really the only way that you can scale and that you can grow yourself. Because if you are bogged down in the details of the job that you used to do, then you are not going to be able to grow into the job that you want to become. I guess that goes without saying, and that's why you're asking the question. But it's worth putting in the time. So first of all, really think about modeling judgment and really showing your work. Thinking about, how can you show your leaders how you think and how you make decisions, how that all goes, what sort of context you consider, what sort of information that you bring in. And this isn't to say that they can't have other styles and that you're always right, but it is important to be able to model these things so that you can give them a path forward, and then they can kind of do with it as they wish. So that's one path that's a little bit more like show and tell. And then the other thing is that when you bring forward something for them to solve or to take on, is to think about it from a question and asking perspective. So ask them some questions. What do you think about this? How would you approach? What are your first steps? And doing it in a way that that isn't totally leading the witness, but giving them the space to think and to apply some of that judgment and some of that decision making that hopefully you have modeled for them. And then lastly, if they're a lost cause, they're not right for you. And sometimes you just need different people.
Yeah, that's a very, very important point. So a couple things. I struggle with this because I tend to have a pretty strong set of opinions, and I like to believe that I'm a strong opinions, loosely held person, and generally I'm mostly that, but there are times where I'm just a strong opinions person. So a few things that I do to try to better signal what is what does good look like, that I think is a big part of this. So number one, when I delegate a task, I try to be very clear about what I've already thought about and what are some of the things that are important to me in the outcome, so that hopefully between those pieces, people will have a better chance of going in a direction that doesn't require me to say, hey, I hate the result of what you just did, which is to me the worst thing. So I really want to be as clear as I can be so that the person can have the highest probability of success. If it's somebody that I know often can maybe get a little bit sidetracked, I also try to build in some early checkpoints of like, hey, why don't you come back to me when you have an outline before you've put a lot of work into it, so that we can calibrate, because I suspect there's more that I'm not articulating properly, and I don't really know what that is, but I want to make sure that we're calibrated. And I always try to make that checkpoint way sooner than the person is comfortable. So if it's something that they say that it's going to take them 2 weeks to do, I'll be like, okay, how about the day after tomorrow? You come back with your initial thoughts so we can get calibrated. So I haven't burned their execution cycle and make them do a bunch of rework, because that to me feels unfair, and I try really hard to avoid that. The last bit is to Amy's broader point, making sure that you're delegating the right kind of work to the right kind of person. I've come to learn that some people are really good in unstructured kind of delegation, and some people find that very paralyzing. And some people have a whole bunch of preconceived ideas that are maybe lacking enough context for the type of job that I'm giving them. So try to be really careful about calibrating the type of thing you delegate into an area of stretch, but not an area of reach for someone. Because if it's too far out of field, you're probably going to be setting both of you up for that unfortunate situation where you realize you have to take it back. You no longer have the time or the ability to let them wander in a direction you can't afford to go. I've always admired Amy's ability to give people a much longer rope. I find that is just really, really not my strength. And so I try to be really clear up front of what good looks like and what it doesn't. And one of the tricks that I've heard Brene Brown use is to talk about the concept of painting done, asking yourself and the person together to co-create the eval of what is the end game so that you've at least got alignment on how you would know if you got to a place that you wanted to go. So those are probably a few tips that are hopefully helpful.
Yeah, and that's a really beautiful gift to give anyone anytime. So that's what people
I think it's also something you should empower the teams to expect that from you, as opposed to always having to remember it yourself. So, make it part of the ritual of a project assignment is just to say, for them to say, hey, can we paint done? Can we talk through what the end result would look like?
I always love your advice.
Oh,
That's my friend.
and the same. I love following your example, my friend. So thank you for this great episode. It's lovely to see you. And thank you to all of our audience members. Please like and subscribe. Send more questions for Leadership Corner. And let's invent the future together, everyone. I believe in us.
Let's make every day count.